Hello, I'm back. We're going to tie another flats Jordan in chartreuse. It's kind of a striped chartreuse or fluorescent yellow, more accurately, and yellow, kind of a barred pattern. And I'm going to go over kind of step by step this fly. Just a brief description here. The fly is designed to catch all the primary species I target on the flats. That would include, mainly it was a fly designed for drum, for freshwater drum, but it catches smallmouth, bowfin, carp, which are all the primary species we target. Also pike and bass, largemouth bass, just about any fish we've caught. I kind of always tell my clients, if we see a musky on the flats, we have a musky rod, so usually switch out and cast to it with a musky fly. But just recently I had a client cast to a musky in about 2 feet of water, and it chased the flats Jordan right to the boat. It fully intended to eat, but it's such a small fly, that was a big musky, and it lost track of it and ended up looking at the boat and spooking pretty hard. So I would have been curious to see if it did eat, if it actually stayed button. I'll kind of explain that too, why it does well with the Esox predators, just based on the shank being in front of the hook. You have that nice kind of body where the fish will get hooked, and the shank will act as a wire leader, so we don't lose as many of these flies to pike on the flats, which is kind of nice. We still lose some, but the ratio is pretty low. We're going to start out with Ahrex hook. This is by far my favorite Ahrex hook. This is the universal curved, and we're going to use a size 6. And this might seem like a smaller hook size for kind of an everything fly, especially for bass, but it's actually, I feel like it's the perfect hook size, and it's nice and thick. It stays, integrity stays well with a big carp. It's not going to bend out. Super sharp. I like the way the barb is. It's a very small barb, kind of a longer area between the point of the hook and the barb, so it really can kind of get its teeth in before the barb becomes an issue. And it's got that nice angle, and that angle helps with penetration, the physics of that angle, versus if it was straight. So it's I think the technology and the fact that it's kind of shorter, not super long, works really well for this design. I've gone through a lot of hooks. This is my favorite. This is by far the best. Got some Orvis thread. It's kind of a different type of thread. It's a little more rounded. Let's see if you want to know here. It's the 3/0 Orvis yellow thread. Pretty strong stuff. Let's start off with some thread wraps on the hook here. I live in a 100-year-old house. We're in the basement. You can hear my wife pretty loud walking up there. That's just part of the deal. It's a nice old creaky house. Tons of character, but the creaks are pretty serious. So we're gonna tie that in. I usually tend to tie it in just a little bit on the bend, so it's kind of pointing up a little bit when it's gonna be a hookup fly. That'll kind of straighten out too as we get more of the body section. We're gonna glue that so it stays in place, and I like to extend the glue a little bit onto the spawn tail. So these are polliwog tails by Spawn. They are super awesome. Gone through lots of iterations of this fly. I finally landed on these. Each tail cut in half. You get 2 for this fly. polar fiber. This is a 3/4 inch polar fiber brush. These are awesome. This material is not hydrophobic. It soaks pretty well. Gets the fly down, being a synthetic, but it does have good movement, and the fly keeps its profile. You'll see when we tie it and it's dry, it'll kind of look kind of big, but once it gets wet, it really like lays down really well, and you can really see the shape of the fly, and the fly in the water looks amazing. Big fan of this material. We're going to tie that in both the fluorescent yellow and the yellow. So we're going to create like a barred pattern, and there's kind of a reason behind it. That I watched a bunch of nature documentaries growing up, and in nature, predators have kind of developed, and the rods and codes have developed to look at UV reflective patterns in their prey. And they did, I remember, I think it was Planet Earth or some documentary, and they showed this stingray, and to the human eye, there was a certain pattern. And then once you flashed UV or ultraviolet light, this whole other pattern emerged. And I kind of like that idea. I like sticking with that theme and kind of creating like a little language of UV underneath my flies, just for fun, and just a thing that I do. And I kind of keep that consistent with my predator style flies when I can, when it makes sense. So yeah, I'll explain everything as I go here with the materials, and I'll put a little list of materials on the video. So 3/4 inch polar fiber brush. These brushes are great. They are a little inconsistent, meaning that the length of the fibers, when you get a packet, there'll be one in there with shorter fibers than the other one, and you can kind of use that to your advantage and use the slightly shorter ones in the back and create a taper like that, which is sometimes what I do. This is 1.5, 2 wraps. I'm gonna take the thread, go back over, and we're gonna wrap back. And the reason being, I'm not gonna cut it. We're gonna continue with that, but I want there to be a pretty substantial force pushing on that tail, because the tail itself is pretty flimsy and it can wrap around the hook, but if you wrap back like that, just minimizes that possibility. So I like to use that material dam to hold that tail in place. We're going to wrap forward some more, but we're going to be a little more sparse at this point. We want to get to about mid-shank. In order to get to mid-shank, we're going to go a little bit past mid-shank, and then we're going to wrap back, and we're going to cut. And that's where we're going to put in our silly legs. So that's about mid-shank right there. And then we'll switch up colors. So this is the tail itself and the material is super UV reflective. But we have, you can see these fibers are pretty long. So I like to trim sometimes. It doesn't, not often, but for this demo, we'll make it look as pretty as we can. And we're just trimming to create a little bit more of a taper when the fly's done. An appearance of a taper. It's a little hard to trim these, and you can actually avoid scissors if you want to create the same effect by just ripping out some of the fibers. Not the best job there, but when all is said and done, you won't notice. So, silly legs. Got these loco legs, hairline dubbing loco legs. Just gonna pull off one, and I'm gonna have it cut it, tight it on my side, A couple loose wraps go over the top of the shank. Whoops. There we go. Over the shank on the other side. Nothing to it. Yeah, nothing to it. Just wrapping either side. I apologize about the sounds coming from the house, but it's kind of keeping with the theme of Halloween, which is right around the corner. We got an old creaky, spooky house. Maybe it's a ghost. Maybe it's my wife. So again, this particular brush is a lot thicker than the previous one I was using, but that's okay. This being thinner, this being a little thicker, it's going to create a little bit of appearance of a taper, which is fine. So since I don't really care about having any pressure points for the rest of this fly, I'm going to do kind of 1.5 right back to the eye, and just keep that the last section a little more sparse. I like to wrap back on the brush before I cut it, just to maximize the amount of material I get out of it. Got these handy little clippers, wire clippers here, and there we go. Now that we got that, I'm just going to wrap a little bit more, create a thread down. It's funny how those footsteps come out super loud in the recording, but this is a budget deal, done on a cell phone, but I do have a ring light, which is pretty cool. So there we have it. We're going to glue that. That's the tail section. As I'm gluing it, I'm just pulling back on the fibers and creating, or just molding them. Just kind of training them to lay back, and the glue will help with that. Next up, we have a Spawn 20-inch shank. 20 millimeter. About the smallest shank we can get away with, given that we're going to put a rattle and some dumbbell eyes on it. These are a little thicker than the original Game Changer shanks, and so I use some needle nose to just open that gap. Now normally that gap would be on the bottom. We're going to flip it up just for the rattle's sake, just so I can lay a little bit more easy on the bottom of the shank there. Flip it over. This is going to be a hookup fly, so this is how it's going to swim. And we're going to close that gap. So this gap right here, we're going to close that. And that's the thought behind that is this fly can foul. Given that the hook's in the back and it rotates, it can catch your line, it can catch the fly. And the thought is that when you close that gap, and I significantly close it, I'm putting a little glue on the metal so the thread sticks. I'm going to wrap all the way back as far as I can go. You're just minimizing the free movement of this hook so that it still has the action, but it's not so free that it swings and catches everything as easy as it would otherwise. So you're just putting a little pressure on it, and the next time I put this thread in, I'm going to create a little bit of a dam, just like I did on the tail, against the hook to further kind of stabilize that back section. It's all about just stabilizing it and making that fly perform exactly how you want it. So if you do those steps, it'll be far less of an annoying fly to cast. This here, I'll put a link to. This is an Amazon special catchfish rattles. They come in 3 or 4 different sizes in here, in the red, which is cool. And this is the smallest one. It's pretty tiny. Fits on this shank here. They come with these little nubs on the end. We're going to cut them off. So just like that. The thing about these rattles is the back side of them is metal, or a BB. They're pretty, for their size, they're pretty loud. So that's going to be put in there. And the reason why I like rattles is because freshwater drum, they are very sensitive to noise and sound. They're a kind of fish that feeds on the bottom. I have found that they tend to track their prey very clumsily, and so the more feedback you can give them when they're hunting, or they're right behind the fly, if you strip that fly a foot, it'll lose track of it. And a lot of times they're just not relying on their eyes. Their eyesight must be poor. Some of them see better than others. But any reinforcement you can give that fish to track that fly, lock into it, start investigating, is going to increase your success. And this is they're a flats drum. A drum in skinny water is a very different fish than freshwater drum that you catch out in the open, or deep water, or murky water. They're really hard. You have to throw a lot of angling at them, meaning that you have to throw a lot of technique, presentation, everything that you do can have an effect, and nothing comes easy with that fish. And so dialing in the fly and your technique, how you fish it, is going to really be an important thing when you're working on targeting that fish. And I found that this fly is just, it hits all the notes in terms of what's needed to maximize the success. Just the size of it, the way it gets down, that's another thing. We're fishing in current, we're fishing in a lake, but that lake has current. It's a delta, and so you need a fly that's easily castable for just about anybody, that when it hits the water, it sinks as fast as possible, but maintains a presence that's not easily lost, and is loud enough both in color so that you can track it with your eyes as a fisherman. The fish can see it, and creates vibrations. It stays on the bottom, but since it's one fly that catches everything, you need to be able to fish it a ton of different ways. And that's kind of the beauty of this fly, is that you can fish it like a clouser. You can fish it fast. You can burn it. You can jig it up and down vertical. It can be a carp fly. It can just lie there and look good, not doing anything. It hits all the notes. So there's the rattle. We're going to throw that up there behind the eyes, and we're going to start wrapping. I like to have the metal end facing back towards the hook. Now this part is a little precarious. See, I just dropped it. And again, my fingers, everything is super small. So right now you can see it's off center. I don't care. I'm just getting wraps over it. The eyes are loose. They're moving. I haven't glued them down. I don't want them to be. I just want to find the balance. So the rattle itself is resting on an incline where the shank, the back side of the shank starts to bump, and that's okay too. So it's all pretty precarious. As you're wrapping over, I'm doing kind of loose wraps just to get thread mass on there, and then I'm using my fingers and I'm looking at it like directly, so I'm angling it at me so I have a direct view of it, how it sits on that shank. And once I get it right, once it feels like it's positioned, I'm going to use Zap-A-Gap to lock it in. And it's pretty effective. Zap-A-Gap is my favorite type of glue to use. It's quick drying. It seems to me to be better than all the rest. So that's about right. Zap-A-Gap. And we're going to put that, we're going to focus on the rib cage, if you will, if you want to think of it as like a body. And then I'm going to put some of the glue on the figure 8 portion of the dumbbell eyes. As that's drying, you can make one little last adjustment, which I'm going to do here. There we go. And once that's dried, it will do a pretty good job of just keeping that in place. And I usually do a few more wraps over it. So this is where a thinner thread is essential. I like a thread that doesn't build up too much mass, but you can really get a lot of wraps in there. So we got the fluorescent tail, fluorescent polar fiber, then we have the non-fluorescent yellow. You can kind of see, I don't know, it's hard to show this stuff on camera. Maybe that'll, yeah, there. So just a little coded language in there. So we have the rattle, and then we have a space where the back of the shank is. I'm going to use that space with this polar fiber brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tie that in, and I'm going to wrap in that space between the rattle and the shank. We might not get very many wraps in there. It's a tight area, so I'm going to use that bodkin just to free up those fibers. It's about 1.5. I'm going to go back over the rattle. I'm going to pinch it. I'm going to leave that free. I'm going to pull the fibers back. Might be the hardest step. Who knows? Let's pull it back that way. Pull it back towards the hook. And I'm going to wrap still behind the rattle. And what I have just done is I've created a thread dam that pushes back on the hook and just further controls the ratio or the movement, the degree of movement of that hook. And although likely insignificant, I think it's an important step nonetheless. So whatever you can do to just control that naturally will make this fly much easier. If you do none of these steps, this fly can get annoying. If you do all the steps, it's a great fly. It works functionally great with the hook in the back. And it will foul sometimes, but usually that's due to someone casting it terribly. So now we're going to go back to, actually we're going to continue, sorry, with the chartreuse, technically fluorescent yellow. So I'm tying that in on top, and that's another point here. The most amount of pressure you can get on this so it doesn't pull out is by tying it on top. Don't tie it in on the side because you're not going to get as much tension on there. So always tie in your brushes on the top when you can. And we're going to start over the rattle. We're going to be a little bit more sparse. So right there, the second wrap, I'm at halfway. I'm going to do one more. I'm going to go more than halfway, and then I'm going to tie back. So I'm going to get the thread in there. Pull back on the fibers. And we're going to tie it back a little bit to about halfway. And that's where we're going to tie in the next set of loco legs. So there we go. Bodkin. We're also going to use this section to tie in some Palmer chenille flash. And this is medium, size medium, fluorescent yellow, keeping with the fluorescent yellow theme. Palmer chenille. We'll get the loco legs in first. Take one off. These are also fluorescent yellow, a little black glitter in them. Half it. Much easier to tie it in here with the rattle. Come over the top. They're uneven. We'll trim them in a minute. Palmer chenille. Tied in on top. We're going to do just one wrap. The polar fiber has flash in it too. And we're going to wrap that back. All right. Yellow. I'm going to finish this up pretty quickly here, but there's a couple more steps that I like to do. So wrap in this yellow. We're going to be sparse here. Already coming under the fly, I'm already behind the eyes. So we're going to go behind the eyes, one more wrap, and then the beginning of a figure eight. So I'm behind the eye of the shank. I'm going to take that thread and I'm going to pinch it there. So I pinched it behind the eye of the shank. I'm going to pull back all the fibers and I'm going to figure eight a few times. And then I'm going to go around the eye, just like that. And that creates us a nice lion's mane. Take the clippers, we'll clip it. And then what I like to do to finish this fly off is I like to use Nightmare musky flies, Titan dubbing, any type of dubbing. I'm going to create a top, consistent top fluorescent. So it's going to be consistent with the tail. It's going to increase visibility. Fluorescent with most people's polarized lenses just comes out, pops a little bit more under the water and helps with tracking the fly. This is about 3 inches long in terms of the fibers. And we're going to shorten that pretty drastically by ripping it over and over again and stacking it. I think this is too much material, so we'll thin it out. I'm going to take almost half of it out there. But I like the Titan flash. I like the flash inside of it. I think that helps as well. Just looks cool. And the goal of this mohawk, if you will, is to have a nice taper, to be long enough to just touch the very tip of the hook. We're going to lay that down. We're going to go over the top of the eye, kind of use our finger to spread it out a little bit. We're going to, it's about 50-50. We're going to pull that back and we're going to wrap a few times. We're going to take the whip finisher. One finish, just because we don't have much real estate, which is okay. You can see it's kind of sticking up. I didn't wrap over it too well, but we'll fix that with the glue. So just by the skin of our teeth, we got that on there. If your eye is crowded, no problem. A little bit of glue and a bodkin, and you can clear that out, no problem. I prefer the eyes to be up front on this fly. I want it to really dive when it hits the water. I want it to go vertical and dive down. I don't want it to sink, at an angle like this. I want it to just vertically dive. So you want the weight closer to the front of the fly as you can get. And sometimes that poses a problem, but I almost always can find a solution to work it out. So, bunch of glue on the front there. I'm going to hold that taper as I'm gluing it. And I'm gluing the eye too as I'm doing that. I don't really care, because the next step I'm going to take this bodkin, and as I hold this down, as it dries, I'm just going to poke that through. And it's going to push all the thread out of the way of the eye of that shank. And you'll be fine. I'm fishing this fly on 12-pound test normally. Ultra premium Cortland or ultra or whatever premium fluorocarbon, Scientific Anglers, whatever. I like the supple, thinner, stronger stuff. Again, that's hydrodynamics. The thinner the leader, the quicker the fly will sink or the tippet. I'm going to trim the silly legs. And then we're going to glue the bottom. And when I glue the bottom, I'm going to create kind of a little landing pad there. I'm going to actually take the glue the dumbbell eyes, glue the threads on the bottom, but I'm also going to train the fibers at the bottom to kind of lay back, because this fly is going to be bouncing on the bottom. So put a little pressure on that as it's drying with my thumb. The rattle does stick out a little bit from the eyes, but not enough to make this fly do anything crazy. And there you have it. Flats Jordan. This is the color that I fish most often in the summertime. I do like to change it up because I fish a lot of the same flats, and these fish see a lot of this fly, but so far so good. So far it's been really productive for me. And wherever you fish it, if you're fishing in clear water, freshwater flats, it definitely is a great color scheme to just see and track the fly. Yeah. So when a pike eats it, the shank is basically your wire leader, and you lose a lot of these, but to pike, but much fewer than you would if it were a different sort of more traditional, just hook pattern. Be curious to see if that musky got hooked, if it actually stayed buttoned. So hopefully one day we'll catch a musky on one of these. But thanks for watching. Appreciate it.